Well, greetings and welcome to the Dividing Line. My name's James White. We are on the road yet once again. Hopefully this is working. It looks like everything over there says it's working anyways. We'll find out. We're also, I really couldn't put Starlink out today, so we're going 5G. Let's hope that when everybody gets home around here, here in Mobile, Alabama, that the cell tower keeps working and we don't crash and burn. It's worked pretty well so far, so we hope. Here in Mobile, we've got the debate on Saturday evening on the subject of the Mass. I hope you'll be praying for that, praying for clarity of thought and expression. It is a different thing to debate someone. When I debated Mitchell Pacwa on this subject, to my knowledge, he has always been a Roman Catholic. So there's a certain dynamic that you have there. It's a different dynamic when you're dealing with someone who was once an ordained PCA minister. Someone who should know what I believe and therefore has specifically abandoned what would be our common confession of faith. That is a different dynamic than dealing with a lifelong Roman Catholic. And so I've also mentioned that I'm a little concerned about it simply because I have never even heard the man speak. I've not been provided any debates, recordings, anything like that at all. I don't, I've said many times, I try to listen extensively to the people that I'm going to be debating. So, months and months and months of listening to Bart Ehrman and Dr. Price and Mitch Pacwa, Shabir Ali, things like that. And the debates that have been the most challenging and difficult were the ones where I debated someone I had no idea where they'd be coming from. So we will see. I will be bringing my fully charged hearing aids with me. And we were trying a different way of doing audio just a few minutes ago. And so I had taken them out and we were trying something else and it didn't work. And so we will see what happens there. Real quickly, some serious stuff to talk about. And if I get into it, I will provide a parental warning. If we have to talk about certain things, I decide to go there. I'm not sure that I will. Been on the road today again, most of the day. So not sitting around watching social media, not sitting around watching news, things like that. But my understanding is that there are some very odd and strange things happening on the election scene, and that there's more and more of a willingness of people on the left to criticize Kamala Harris. And I'm a theologian, an apologist, textual critical guy, so I'm not claiming any special knowledge of politics, but always in the back of my mind as I have considered what the left is doing to degrade and destroy Western culture is the fact that they will turn on each other. We do live in God's world. Romans 1 is true of them. And it just makes me wonder, Kamala Harris became the nominee via a coup. And I know that Joe Biden is senile. But I've gotten the feeling in some of the things he has said that he's not overly happy about what happened. I know Mrs. Biden isn't. She was looking forward to another 4 years of power. And so I'm just wondering, maybe if there's not some stuff going on in the background, some backstabbing, people turning on other people. What is it? I think someone said 11 days, something like that to go. What do you bet some really interesting stuff happens? Nah, it's going to be boring. It's 11 days. Nothing's gonna happen. Yeah, I did. By the way, I shouldn't say this, but I went through the drive-thru at McDonald's. I was rushing around. I just needed to grab something I hadn't. You got to remember something. One of the one of the tortures of living the life I'm living right now, the RV life, is that when I'm driving down the road, like today, Louisiana. Have you ever heard of a rest stop? I mean, I'm serious. I'm looking for a rest stop, because I've got a toilet, in the thing behind me on the road, so I just need a place to pull over. There is no place to pull over. I mean, I can just go in the rest stop and use my own restroom if I want to, but in Texas, you're going to have a rest stop every 20, 25, 30 miles. They're really nice ones, too. Louisiana, forget it. And so I finally crossed the border into Mississippi, and within 1 mile, you had the Mississippi Welcome Center and nice restrooms and all this stuff. And it's like, whew, thank goodness. So it's just part of life. And now I totally lost where in the world I was going. I went and stopped and told you about what was going on there. But anyway, I didn't get a chance to listen to stuff. Oh, so let me finish that part of the story. It came back to me. Today I had a protein bar, and these are my 2 drinks that I had with me in the door of the truck. And that's pretty much all I had for 5 hours of driving. And you're passing all of these Canes. I love Canes. And Chick-fil-A. Yeah. Canes is a little better than Chick-fil-A, but they're both really good. All these, and I can't go there. There's no place for me to park. I certainly can't go through the drive-thru. Not when you're 13 and a half feet tall. You've never noticed that, little thing up there? Well, I'm too wide, and believe me, I'm too tall. And way too long. Can't go through drive-thrus, and there's almost never any place to park. Once in a while you see big rig parking or something like that. That's extremely rare. So, it's like torture. So I unhooked in Lafayette because I was going to go see a kind Christian chiropractor that helped put my neck in better shape. It was getting really bad. And so on the way, I just needed to grab a quick bite to eat. I needed to get there at a certain time. So I knew there was a McDonald's close by. So I went through, got a filet of fish sandwich. And please don't send me stuff about how bad filet of fish sandwiches are. I'm not interested whatsoever, okay? You give thanks to God for it, and you go on from there. And so I go through the drive-thru, and I pull up to the first window, and there's this young guy in there. And the window opens, and he tells me what it is. And I go, oh, I'm disappointed. I was hoping for President Trump. And he smiled, and I said, I bet you I'm not the first one to say that today, am I? And he says, nope. And I said, you got to admit, best advertisement ever. And he says, oh, yeah. So it was. I'm wondering if they're going to, there's be some kickbacks there or something like that along the line. So anyway, here we are. And speaking of the, what's going on, I think some interesting stuff is going to happen between the next 11 days. I think every day. I heard the only clip I did turn on Fox News in the truck briefly because I'll tell you what I was listening to here in a moment. And they had a clip of someone interviewing Kamala Harris, and he goes, do you really believe Donald Trump is a fascist? And she says, yes, I believe that. And I guess she likened him to Hitler or something. It wasn't all that long ago that presidential elections had a level of respect to them. And look, Donald Trump does not bring a level of respect to presidential politics, but there just isn't any left anywhere. The first president I ever voted for was Ronald Reagan. And it's still classic. I mean, there's great uh, reels on YouTube of Ronald Reagan jokes because he was called the great communicator, and he was a great communicator, and he was great with jokes, and he won the election against Mondale. Of course, that was I think up to that point, and I think it's still the most lopsided victory ever in presidential politics. I think he only got one state, I think, Minnesota, where he was from. But he won that debate, and he won the election with one joke during one of the presidential debates. And the people asking the questions, and back then, they actually tried to ask fair questions to both sides. Shocking. The media was not yet completely on the payroll of the Communist Party and the Democratic Party. Same thing anymore. And so Reagan was asked about his age because he was considerably older, and he did start developing Alzheimer's toward the end of his term, but he was considerably older than Mondale. And Reagan goes, "I am not going to allow the issue of age and my opponent's inexperience to become. I'm not going to use that in this election." I forget you can look it up. It's and the camera showed Mondale. Mondale knew that Mondale was a really boring guy. I mean, he was just, talk about milquetoast boring. The look on his face is, I am not only am I not going to try to respond to this because it would be disastrous, but I realize I just lost. It's over. It's done. Yeah. That was the zinger of all zingers. That is there are about 3 or 4 Reagan jokes, like the little puppies or kittens, that the little boy was selling. That's a great joke. Look it up. And the Republican and Democrat manure pile. That's a great one. He had all sorts of zinger jokes about Russia, about the Soviets. Just, I think he mocked the Soviet Union into collapse. It wasn't the arms race, the space race. I think it was Reagan's jokes that just, we give up. We're just going to move to America and take over that way, which is what they've done. But then my favorite is Miss Me. Put in Ronald Reagan and Miss Me. And the problem is, some of you won't know why it's so hilariously funny. But he had been shot. I've told you before, I was sitting in guitar class my senior year in high school. And the vice principal came on, Mr. Munoz came on the loudspeaker system at school and told us the president had been shot. And it was months after that, after he'd recovered. He almost died. I've read some books about what happened. They barely saved him. But when he recovered, it happened twice. He did it twice that I know of. But there was like a balloon that popped, or a light bulb that exploded, or something. It got just bang. And everything stops, and you see him looking at his notes, and he goes, "Miss me." that takes guts. It really does take guts. And that did remind me of something else, just real quickly here. Mike Licona, totally shifting gears here. Well, sort of. I saw this. It came up on Twitter, I think. Mike Licona is one of those shorts things, where the video's framed like a phone screen or something like that. And he's talking about how he just voted. And it was actually well edited. I voted for religious freedom. I voted for freedom of speech. I voted against endless wars, and all the rest of this stuff. And I'm watching this, and I'm nervous because I've criticized Dr. Licona a number of times, and it will be in the future where you talk about his view of inerrancy and stuff like that, and you have to do that. But so I'm wondering, where's this going? And then at the end, he goes, and there is only one candidate to vote for to accomplish all these things. And he reaches down, he puts on a MAGA hat. He says, I voted for Donald Trump. And I was like, well, good on you. I mean, given even quote unquote Christian scholarship contexts in a lot of seminaries these days, and a lot of woke people running around Christian seminaries today, sadly. And I'm like, that took some guts. It really did. He's taking a chance to do that. He's gonna get criticized. And I was like, good on him. Good on him. Give that boy a pat on the back. Now let's talk about inerrancy. But anyway, I did. I have criticized him. So when he does something that took some serious guts, I'm like, okay, thumbs up. Give him credit on that one. That was good. Okay. I am not completely certain how to address this particular topic. I'm really not. I've been thinking a lot about it today as I was driving, and I really may have stumbled across something here that, well, you know what? Put the clutch in. One other thing I did want to mention real quick before I get to the really heavy stuff. So I want to get that. I don't want to put the really heavy stuff in the middle, and people might have to tune out and stuff and then miss everything else. Well, they're both heavy topics, but for different reasons. I did want to comment. 2 days ago, I listened to Pastor David Berzins, I'm not totally certain. He is one of the NIFB, and I think NIFB is done, New Independent Fundamentalist Baptists. It's a movement that Steven Anderson pretty much started and sort of ruled over, a little Pope type thing going on there. But by his own testimony, well, let me just mention, if you're not aware of this, I don't know how you can't be aware of this, but Steven Anderson's 4 adult children that have left the home have all recorded sometimes multi-hour video interviews accusing him of being abusive to his wife being abusive, both of them being abusive to kids, beatings, just all sorts of really ugly, nasty stuff. And Steven Anderson has tried in the past to, has personally attacked me, Jeff Durbin. There's no love lost there in that sense. But when I first started hearing about it, I was like, the anger that he has always demonstrated is not. This isn't overly shocking to me. But I don't want to get in this. One of the children actually contacted me, and I wrote back, and I'm like, nice to hear from you. Yeah, your dad and I have had some battles in the past. Are you talking about some kind of interview or just what? And he went with somebody else pretty quickly, and I don't move overly fast with stuff like that, and I was feeling uncomfortable about it one way or the other. My issues with Steven Anderson have been biblical, historical, factual. I didn't necessarily want to pile on with all the rest of this stuff. And so there's a lot of people separating from Anderson. The NIFB, I think, is pretty much just falling apart. And this David Berzins, he tells the story at the beginning of just, I mean, this seems to have been one of Steven Anderson's best friends. Led this guy's wife to the Lord, baptized him. They were in the church for years and years. Anderson helped them plant churches. And of course, these are NIFB, screaming King James only, anti-lordship churches, which are not healthy. They're abusive. But anyway, but he gives his credentials, and they're quite impressive in the sense that this was one of Anderson's closest buds, closest friends, involved in ministry for, I think, 18 years. A lot. And he's making the announcement to their church that they are separating from Pastor Anderson. And I was listening to this, again, while driving, and I just, part of it is we're all still thinking about and processing the Steve Lawson stuff, even though it sure has gotten quiet. I wonder how long it's going to stay quiet. It can't stay quiet. They can't. You can't. Well, they can try. And I have the feeling they're going to try. But that's only going to make it worse. There needs to be a sufficient, not sufficient to answer all the people that want dates, times, and everything else, but sufficient to satisfy biblical mandate, shall we say. Explanations for what actually took place and things like that. So, you think about stuff like that. You think about how difficult things like that are, and I don't want to see. I don't even want to see that going on even amongst churches that I would consider to be extremely imbalanced and downright dangerous, honestly. And so I was just sort of like, ugh. But now that all this stuff is out there, I'm not thinking so much. I did see a clip from, I think, a few days ago, Anderson railing away, and now he's going after this guy and saying, anybody who's telling you to go watch these videos, his kids' videos, they're sinning because they're disrespecting their parents. You're like, okay, look. And he mentions that in one of them, my son called me a bleep bleep. He didn't say bleep bleep, but you knew what he was talking about. Hey, I get it. I was very turned off by the language that was used by a couple of the children. And that saddens me. It saddens me a lot. And that isn't necessary. And that is destructive. And it is sinful, for that matter. But do you really think that pointing out that it's sinful that they used bad language of you is an answer to the actual issue? The actual issue being the accusations that you're not refuting? And that this, like Bearson said, what finally clicked for him was when he listened to what the kids were saying, and he goes, I was there. I saw that. My wife and I saw that. It all started coming together. But the real thought that crossed my mind was, shouldn't Bearsons and all these other guys be sitting back going, have we missed it all along? Have we adopted an absolutely abusive methodology of ministry, preaching and teaching? Is it possible that we're this tiny little group out here that everyone's just like, and that there's a reason for that? And it's not because we are the super godly biblical ones, but because we've got blinders on? I mean, Pastor David, you've got to deal with the reality that you missed this. You said you were close to these people. You were in their home. You missed it. And you might say, well, you always miss Steve Lawson. Well, all I ever, I've said before, Steve and I had dinner once where he picked my brain on John chapter 10 and used me as a sermon, someone to help him with the sermon, without telling me it at that time. And we had dinner a second time at a G3 thing. But even then, even though I was sitting right next to him, we were pretty much talking to different people. And even though we spoke at the same conferences, and I would sit, I might be sitting right next to him in the Q&A. As soon as the Q&A was over, he's up and out of there, and I'm out talking to folks. And so, yeah, no, I did not have any type of close relationship with Steve Lawson at all. I didn't spend time in his home. If his wife had walked by, I wouldn't have known who she was. None of that kind of stuff. So I feel for these guys, and my hope and prayer is that they're going to go, because I appreciate this guy goes, look, I have to do what Scripture says, and we're supposed to separate from people like this. And okay, but consider whether maybe your view of Scripture has been stunted by human traditions and by the fact that fundamentalism is primarily a religion of fear, and that it keeps you from looking at other perspectives. Give some consideration to it. Think about it. I think that's important. All right, so back to what I was going to say. On the last program, I played a portion of a clip of an interview on the Danny Jones webcast of a man by the name of Ammon Hillman, Dr. Ammon Hillman. I'd never heard of him. My dear brother Jeff Durbin sent me that clip, I think the night before, and said, hey, someone sent this to me, said it would be valuable for us to comment on it. And so what do you think? And so I listened to it, and I was like, whoa. Because it's stuff like on the Greek Septuagint and the relationship of the Septuagint to the Hebrew text, to the Masoretic text, Hebrew Old Testament textual criticism, the various traditions, the Targums, and all that stuff. That's something that I've always found very fascinating. It's very, very interesting. It's a little bit esoteric for a lot of folks, but when you do apologetics, you've got to be familiar with this kind of stuff. And so I found it really interesting. The next day, the day of the last program, so on Tuesday, someone on Facebook, and I mentioned this, sent me a message. You think you could respond to Ammon Hillman's stuff on Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? And I just wrote back question mark because I didn't make the connection. And then by the time he got back to me, I had made the connection and had looked up what he was talking about. That was the second clip that I mentioned on the last program. Then, after the last dividing line, Rich and I were chatting in Signal, and he said, is that the guy that the folks down in Florida wanted you to come on the webcast about? And I'm like, huh? I didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, I sent you an email. And I was like, okay. I mean, I slept since then. And so when he resent it, then I went, oh yeah, I did respond to this email. And it was just sort of a generic thing where this guy was going, we'd like to fly you out to Florida. And a lot of people suggested you need to, there's been a lot of discussion on our program about the Bible and manuscripts, stuff like that. And a lot of people said, we need to have you on to talk about these things. And I had said, well, I don't fly anymore, so I will be on the East Coast or close to the East Coast. supposed to be, depending on what happens with the election, in September of 2025 at G3. And you can get down to Florida from Atlanta if you needed to. And so I sort of left that out there. And then I suggested somebody else, because he had talked about manuscripts, stuff like that. I had said, hey, I'd contact Peter Gurry from Phoenix Seminary. He's great on that stuff. And I never heard back. So once Rich sent me that email, I looked. It was the producer for the same show. This show that we had responded to on the last program. And so I think the fellow on Facebook said, yeah, there's like a 3.5 hour program they did with him. So I'm like, I listened to all the rest of that second clip, because remember on the last program I said I hadn't even listened to all of it yet. And I was stunned. What I played for you was probably some of the most innocuous, at least discussable, debatable elements of that 3.5 hour program. I found it yesterday, started it yesterday, and finished it today. And I've been thinking to myself, how do I even address this? Large portion. Well, not only that, they edited. Now, if you become a Patreon member, you can get the unedited version and all the rest of that, blah, blah, blah. But the reason they edited it, and so there'd be these snippets of silence, but often the first letter would be there so you could sort of guess what was being said. The reason they edited it is because of how foul it is. And I don't mean 4-letter words. There's a couple of those. It's vile. It was oppressive to listen to. Spiritually oppressive. Demonically so. Demonically so. I'm being perfectly serious. Early on in the interview, Hillman says that he spent time in Israel on an archaeological dig. And they were in a kibbutz. And you'd share rooms with people. In a kibbutz, obviously. And 2 nights in a row, the other person, in the middle of the night, sat bolt upright in bed, waking him up, and turned to him, and both of them didn't know each other. Both of them said, you will have, what was it, a company or a troop? You have a troop of demons protecting you because you are going to bring forth the Antichrist. And remember, I read to you what it says on the video from Danny Jones. It says, Dr. Ammon Hillman earned his MS in bacteriology and PhD in classics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he specialized in ancient Greek and Roman medicine and pharmacy. His first book, The Chemical Muse, was published with St. Martin's Press immediately after his dissertation committee forced him to delete all references to recreational drugs from his thesis. They talk about this in the thing. Dr. Hillman was recently investigated by the Vatican for demon possession and portal opening while teaching as a professor of classical languages. Portal opening. Demon possession. And he's talking about these people saying he's going to bring forth the Antichrist. When I mean, it meanders everywhere, and not in the endearing way that Dave Hunt meandered everywhere. It meanders everywhere in the way that any conversation with a drug addict meanders everywhere. If you've ever talked to someone who is shot out. Permanent reorganizing of the pathways of the brain through chemical substances. They lose the ability to follow logical thought and to make categorical comparisons. They can't compare categories. And as a result, since they can't compartmentalize things properly, they will make connections to things across compartmental borders that the rest of us don't make. And they may think this is their enlightenment. And I think this man believes exactly that. That his ability to make these connections is enlightenment. What it actually is the fog of drug abuse. And it became very obvious to me, first of all, I'm not questioning for a second that the man is quite capable in classical Greek. That's different than Koine, but classical Greek. He is widely read, highly intelligent. He can bring all sorts of interesting facts to mind, but he is, at the same time, incredibly arrogant, thinks that Greek classical studies is all there really is. He looks down his nose at classicists who specialize in Latin works, has no respect whatsoever for biblical scholarship or anything like that, slammed biblical scholars over and over again. So there's an incredible arrogance there, but there is an imbalance that is absolutely astonishing. I've never seen someone as imbalanced as this man. The world revolves around drugs for this man. He finds them in everything. In everything. He thinks he has found the key that enlightens the mind, opens the mind to understand how everything relates to everything else, and it's drugs. It's not just doing drugs. It's seeing that drugs are being done everywhere. And I mentioned in the last program, a lot of people are unaware. The Greek term pharmakia in the New Testament, from which we get pharmacy, pharmaceuticals, is often associated with spirits and demonism. And certainly, up until modern times, there was very little distinction made. And so there was a tremendous amount of heroin use and all sorts of shrooms and everything else and all the popular psychedelic stuff that they're talking about today, where, you know, people take this stuff and they see God and they have all these experiences. And there's nothing overly new about that. And Greek and Roman pagan religion was filled with mind-altering experiences, using drugs to open your mind to demonic influences. And it was very often associated, obviously, with sexual activity. So, you know, you've probably heard your pastor, he was probably rather careful about it. You've heard your pastor, sorry about that, I got a little ice cube in there. You've heard your pastor, when preaching in 1 Corinthians, talking about, you can't help, when they're talking about meat sacrificed to idols, you give the background of what was going on in Corinth. That there were 3 pagan temples and a food market, and the fourth corner was a food market, and every corner in Corinth. That it was all over the place. That's how the city made most of its money. And that there were temple prostitutes, male and female. So, you know, you don't have to get overly specific, but it's very, very obvious that there was this kind of demonic, evil, pagan worship going on. And the church of Corinth gets 2 epistles because those are the people that are being converted by the Spirit of God in that place. And it's a dark, dark place. So, despite the fact that he thinks none of us knew this, I've known this since seminary. And obviously, some of these things I did learn on my own. But, in my own studies and things like that. But it's not hidden knowledge. It's not, some new thing that we're waiting for him to come along and reveal to all of us. That there has been a lot of drug use, and drugs were used in the cults. Cult doesn't mean Jehovah's Witnesses normally. The various Gnostic groups, as well as others, where you obtain knowledge through going through various ceremonies. These ceremonies might include sexual debauchery. They might include drugs. They might include all of that at the same time, normally. And then you're given special keywords, et cetera, that allegedly open your mind. And what's actually happening is your mind's being opened by the drugs and then influenced by demonic spirits. That's general knowledge, at least for New Testament scholars and people who do New Testament background studies and things like that. And, probably in my dad's generation and the generation before that, you didn't really talk much about that from the pulpit. But it's in the books. And so it is pretty much general knowledge. And so it doesn't matter what you're talking about with Ammon Hillman. It's all about drugs. And he strikes me as an individual who has experimented with pretty much all of them as well. His speech patterns, his inability to stay on course, jump over here, jump over there. And then there were a couple times they put up some screenshots of some slides he had given them from a presentation he does. And quoted from an 1850s Oxford Greek lexicon, classical Greek lexicon. And they're, it's similar to Bauer and Gingrich or Kohler Baumgartner, the modern lexical sources that if you've got Accordance or Logos, something like that, you can look them up yourself. Point is, they put these things up there, and I was listening as he would go, oh, and look down here. See what this is here? This is this. And then he'd go over here and he connected that. The abusive way that he used lexical sources. No one who's had even rudimentary training in how to use those sources would use them the way he was using them. But whenever he would make some wild, insane claim, the guy who was interviewing him even said at one point, I've never read the Bible. And he kept saying, is that in the Bible? Is that in the Bible? And this guy would keep saying, yeah. And he'd believe him. Or when he'd make a super wild claim, even the interviewer is like, what? He says, well, that's what the Greek says. And at one point he's talking about how Greek expands the mind like no other language. And it's just as bad as all these Hebrew roots guys, that says, you'll never be able to figure it out until you take my class on Hebrew. Or Aramaic or Latin, or for that matter, who cares? Massive imbalance everywhere with this guy. Just, it absolutely horrific. And so at one point, for example, he's trying to make a comparison, a connection. The stuff that he says about the arrest of Jesus, this is where I just don't even know how much I can say. I can tell you this, and maybe I'll find a way to address this in a appropriate fashion in the future. But he's making the most vile, blasphemous, and idiotic accusations against the character of the Lord Jesus. And I mean absolutely vile. And the argumentation he's using would not survive cross-examination for 3 minutes. But I don't think you could debate this guy. I don't think he has the capacity. I don't think he could keep within time limits. I don't think he could answer questions. He would wander off this direction, wander off that direction. You'd be constantly having to stop him. It would be a royal mess. I just don't even know that he could make a understandable presentation in 20 minutes that would be sufficient to function in a debate. So he's making these assertions, and he mentions that Jesus said, prays to the Father and says, "Take this cup from me." And then I didn't catch exactly, he said a lot of Greek. Normally it was pretty clear and understandable for someone who knows Greek. Sometimes it would be said so quickly I wouldn't really catch it, but he tries to make a connection to the cup that the woman who rides the beast has in the book of Revelation. And I'm like, he goes, "It's the same word." I'm like, ooh. Paterion is not exactly an unusual term in the Greek language. I mean, cup. That's a cup is a cup. It's not like it. No, it's the same word. Yeah, it is, but in the real world, in the world of people whose minds have not been blown through various drug usages, here's what he says. He says that he makes the claim that all of the disciples were boys. Young, not even really teenagers. And that, of course, is just so bizarrely absurd that it's, if you've never heard it before, you just sort of go, what? Peter's probably older than Jesus. I mean, they're fishermen. They're married. Peter has a mother-in-law. What are you babbling about? These people, they're not looking at the Bible and going, what is a consistent, truthful understanding of all of this? They just get to pick and choose whatever they want. And if there's other stuff in the same book that contradicts your perspective, who cares? You don't worry about it. That's what drugs allow you to do. It's just, well, I don't care. And so he's saying that Jesus and his boys came to this park. He calls it a park. The Garden of Gethsemane he calls a park for some reason. I have no idea why. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning, and the reason Jesus is arrested is because people are objecting to immoral activities taking place. And that Jesus is under the influence of drugs. And that's why he falls down and he's in pain and all the rest of this stuff. And again, the host of the program, who's never read the Bible, even though if you look at the topics they've had all sorts of people. That Mormon guy was on it recently, and he's had a Gnostic on a bunch of times, and just if it's weird, heretical, wild, and fanciful, you get hours. And hey, they contacted me, so I'm just simply saying, They pick some interesting people, but the guy has no idea. So he's like, really? And of course, this guy asked Hillman, how many versions of the Bible are there? And Hillman's like, oh, at least 12. And I'm like, what? Are you talking translations? Are you talking about the underlying Greek and Hebrew texts? He hasn't a clue. I got no sense whatsoever, and I listen for stuff like this, that he has a clue what the difference between the TR and the Nessial 28th is. He probably has never even heard of CBGM. And I'm talking about Hillman here, and I wouldn't expect the host of the program to know any of that stuff at all. And so Hillman gets away with everything. He can just whatever he just throws a few Greek words out there, and everybody's like, "Oh, okay, well, whatever you say." If they had just read the section from any scholarly translation whatsoever, and I get the feeling from Hillman, if it's not his translation, it's not a scholarly translation. Seriously, that's how arrogant the man is. Mark 14:33, and he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and troubled. Now, if you're reading everything through a drug thing, his theory is that Jesus had taken some venom, viper venom, and so he's tripping out, and that's what's going on. And he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch." He went a little beyond them and fell to the ground and began to pray that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And notice what it is. The hour might pass from him. And he was saying, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. So there's the cup. And he makes this elaborate connection to the woman riding the beast, and she has a cup in Revelation. What would a rational person, a person whose brain is still functioning properly, what would someone who wants to seriously understand, Mark 14:35, kai pra elthon mikron epipten epiteges kai pros eukata hina I dunatan estin par elthe op autu he hora, the hour. Kai elegan abba ha pater, planta dunata soi, par enenke ta paterion, is the term, tuta op emu, al uti ego thello, ala tisu. So if you want to know what those words mean, the first thing you need to do is going to go, well, in the same sentence, he has said to the Father, pray if it were possible that the what? Hey, hora, the hour, might pass from him. All things are possible. Remove this cup from me. So hour and cup are being used interchangeably. And so you're going to start by asking the question, what does hour and cup refer to? It's not difficult to figure out if you'll allow Mark to be Mark, if you actually want to know what was being said, and if you don't import a massive assumption that everything written in the ancient world, including written by monotheistic Jews in Israel, is connected to the Greek cults and their use of drugs and sex. It's not too difficult, but it's beyond this guy. It doesn't even cross his mind. Doesn't even cross his mind. So, like I said, I've seen bad stuff. When Michael Brown in 2011 wrote his book on homosexuality, when he did the chapter on homosexual exegesis, he warned you beforehand, this stuff is disgusting. And it is. And of course, we have the wild, wacky world of Gail Ripplinger, too. I mean, that kind of ultra silliness from the King James only movement. This beats them all. And it beats them all in a serious way. Because, as I said, it was oppressive to listen to. Remember that at the beginning he says that these people said to him, waking out of sleep, that he didn't even know these people. They said to him, you have a company of demons protecting you because you will bring forth the Antichrist. Now, of course, he completely redefines Christos. Since he says, as we saw in the last program, that the Old Testament was actually written in Greek originally, and it only was written in the 3rd century. There's no Moses, there's no law, no prophecies. All that stuff is pure bunkum, according to him. Then he has no way of recognizing that Christos is translating Mashiach, and that Mashiach, and what that means, is what Christ means. Since he cuts that off out of his ignorance, he doesn't know anything about that stuff. He doesn't think he needs to. Hey, all you got to do is know Greek. Then he can come up with this complete redefinition of what the anointed one means. And it really starts taking on, there's some Gnostic stuff that comes into it as well. Not the whole Gnostic worldview, but some of it sneaks in there as well at certain points. And bringing in the Antichrist is good because it opens eyes, it opens minds. And I think he has completely embraced that demonic prophecy that he received, that he talked about. So let me give you an illustration here at the end. I'm not even going to put the video up. I'm just going to let you hear it. Well, look, if this is as fair use as you can get, all right? If they ding us on this, that just tells you they're afraid of being refuted. But this is in the last minutes of the interview. And it's sort of the interviewer's gone, so what does all this mean? What does all this mean? So I want you to hear this. Oops.
And he's saying it. This is what you're going to do. People don't. They read a fairy tale. I want the real Jesus. I don't want a fairy tale Jesus. I want the one that was arrested with a kid. And I want to know that my society has based its morality on that dude.
Wow. Powerful stuff, man. Where can people pirate your books?
Yeah, you know what? I think I'm just going to...
Well, I'm sorry. Maybe it came after that. I don't know. I apologize. You heard what he said there. And then what he says then is religion's fantasy. If you really knew who Jesus was, you don't want to be like him. You don't want to go celebrate what he was doing. And the guy's like, and what would that leave us? And he said, absolute human freedom. Absolute, what do you call it? Certain kind of human freedom. Antinomian? Something? I forget what term he used. Anyways, absolute human freedom. And then he actually says that's what this democracy was based upon, which is gives you an idea of how utterly disconnected from history he really is. If he thinks that the United States was based upon that kind of... They didn't want a democracy. They wanted a republic. And there was a reason for that. And it was their Christian heritage and foundation that was behind that. And he evidently is unaware of that rather obvious fact. But what he expressed as his ultimate goal is the denigration of Jesus Christ and the exaltation of mankind to the ultimate position of authority. That is Antichrist. That's what the Antichrist is. He's denying that Christ has come in the flesh. Jesus is no divine person. He was an evil, vile person. And mankind is the measure of all things. That's Antichrist. He's fulfilling the prophecy. Now, I've never said this about anyone on this program, to my knowledge. And I did not look up the stuff to see if maybe I have, and I just didn't know about it. Having listened to 3.5 hours of this individual blabbering on this program and wandering all over the planet, I believe, and I'm not recommending that you watch it. I told you, it is oppressive. It is spiritually oppressive. And I believe it's spiritually oppressive because I believe Ammon Hillman is demonized. I see no other explanation. I believe he has opened himself through his love of pharmacology, drugs, and the idea that this is the way to open your mind to other realities. I believe he's opened himself to the demonic realm, and he is demonized. If you want to see a demonized man, because you want to go, well, but you know, look at the Gadarene demoniac, he was cutting himself. And that's true. That's true, but that's not the only example of demonized people that we have in the scriptures. There were others that could behave in society, but they would then seek to pervert truth and promote evil. And I believe Ammon Hillman is demonized. I truly do. And the things that he's teaching are absolutely diabolical. Absolutely diabolical. Again, remember, he was investigated for demon possession. So it may be more obvious than a lot of people on the internet would be able to tell. There's so many claims, so many false claims, so many lies, so many abuses of truths. That's frequently the hard thing for people to recognize is when someone takes the truth and abuses it. That, as the Lord gives me strength, what I want to try to figure out how to do is to respond to as much as I can without rolling in the filth and the gutter that this man's views represents, because it is vile. It is beyond vile. But you can take forms of argumentation, certain assertions, without necessarily following them through to their conclusion, and demonstrate that they are just utterly absurd. Here's the thing that bothers me the most, however. This particular video, Danny Jones has 930,000 subscribers. And this video has been viewed 1.4 million times. 1.4 million. That shows a lust for unbelief. A lust for unbelief. These are people who want a reason to not bow the knee to Jesus Christ. And he will give you the reason. If you believe him, you will never, ever even consider the claims of Christ. That's why it's demonic. And one of the gifts that God has given to this ministry is the ability to refute this kind of not just heresy, not just lies, not just falsehood. This is diabolical insanity masquerading as scholarship. Not that there's any serious biblical scholars that would even think about the absurdities he says, but I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about the 1.4 million people that have heard this stuff, and then they can't figure out what he's saying, so they're just going to repeat bits and pieces of it. And you are going to end up being the person. I'm pointing at you. You're going to be the person that ends up sitting across the table from somebody at a youth gathering, a school, whatever else might be, and you're going to start getting hit with stuff you've never even heard of before. Where's it coming from? Right there. Right there. So I think it would be extremely helpful if Alpha and Omega Ministries fulfills its calling to do an extended series. And it wouldn't be every program. It would be maybe a few minutes in a program, or 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. But deal with the foundations. Because people can always come up with off-the-wall stuff. But if we have the proper foundations, then we can recognize where that stuff's coming from and be ready to give an answer for the hope that's within us. That's what we're called to do. You say, even from a demonized person? Well, it's the demonized person that's being used to spread the lies to others. And like I said, I've never heard anything like this before. Never did. So, wow. But I also need to lay it aside for the next 48 hours or so, because it's 48 hours till the debate will have started 47 hours ago, I think. So, please do pray for that. Please pray that I can refocus my attention there. That's where it needs to be. So there we go. All right. I told you it was going to be a little bit heavy. There was a lot of heavy stuff there, really, I guess. But anyway, we appreciate you listening to the program. And the next time will be as I'm traveling to Fort Worth for Fight, Laugh, Feast. Appreciate your prayers for my travel. And we will see you next time. God bless.